Hey guys, welcome back to the real Mr. Beer. This is Mr. Beer's own channel on Twitch TV. We're here to provide homebrewing guidance and tips, equipping you with all sorts of beer knowledge. My name is Josh Ratliff. I'm a BJCP certified beer judge, brewmaster for Mr. Beer, and I'm the store manager at Everything Homebrew here in Tucson, Arizona. So today we're taking over from last week, or not last week, week before. I was out last week. You may see me limping around the brew room today. I have a little bit of a gimpy leg, but I was out because of that. So we're taking over from the first intro to All Grain, which we did 2 weeks ago, was the mash. And I'm just going to kind of review what we did there. So we did we added our grains to our malt tun, which you'll see right here, and added water that was at about 170, 175 degrees, so that it gets down to about 165 to 168 when it hits the grains, because the grain will displace, they'll heat exchange and lower that temperature. You want to be about 165, 168, and no lower than 155 for your mashing. You'll hold it for an hour, which is why these mash tuns are really great, these coolers, because they hold that temperature in for quite a while. I'm actually using my hot liquor tank, which is a fancy name for water tank in brewing. It's also a cooler. So this has been sitting for an hour at about 155, 160 degrees. This is actually different than what I brewed last week, or the last show. This is going to be a simple pale ale, about 5%. Nothing really fancy. It's going to have the Bavarian Mandarina and Huell melon hops in it, so it's going to be pretty good. Really sessionable, easy to drink. Really simple grain bill, just some 2-row, a little bit of wheat, a little bit of carapils, and some crystal 10 to give it a little bit of a kind of toasty, good backbone for the hops. So what we're going to be talking about today, now that the mash is done, I'm going to have to lauter it. Lautering is a process in brewing where the mash is separated into the clear liquid wort from the residual grain. And it consists of 3 steps: mash out, recirculation, and sparging. Mash out is when you raise the temperature of the mash to 170 degrees before separating it. This step helps stop all the enzymes, and it makes for the grain bed and the wort more fluid. When you're adding 1.5 to 2 quarts of water per pound of grain, you don't really need to do a mash out. It is required though if, say, your mash tun is a little bit too small and you can't use that much water, then you'll have to pull some of the wort off and then mash out then. But again, it's not necessary for this particular batch. Recirculation is what I'm going to be doing right now, and this is going to clarify the wort that's being drawn out. When it first comes out of the spigot, there's going to be a lot of grain particles, husks, and things like that. So by recirculating it, it'll make it more clear when it comes out, and it kind of settles the grain bed down. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. I just take a pitcher and put my hose in there, and give this a nice good stir before you do it too. And so doing this about 2 or maybe 3 times will clear your batch. It's a lot easier to see when it's a clearer beer like this than when you're doing something like, say, a stout. Go ahead and remove the thermometer. I don't need that anymore. So go ahead and add it gently. Don't add it vigorously, otherwise you're just going to stir up all that stuff again. And I'll show you, actually, you can see in the, my beer out of the way, you can see in the picture there the particulates that are that are from the bottom that settled during the mash. So you're trying to recirculate those to the top of the mash so that you have less trub in your boil. Because if you get a lot of trub, you get a lot of those husks in there, a lot of these particles. When they boil, they're going to release tannins that are going to add extra astringency and bitterness to your beer, a sharp bite you won't like. So recirculation, which is also known as Vorlauf, the German term for it, is a very important step before you start your lautering. I'm sure Renee will get on me on the pronunciation of that. She's our German expert. Vorlauf. Okay. So I'm going to do it one more time because it's looking pretty clear. Yeah, I'm not getting nearly as many particles as I did when I first poured into this pitcher. So that means the grain bed has settled down, because when you're pulling the wort out, it creates a vacuum that pulls that bed down into a nice filter for the beer. And that you really need that, especially if you're going to be doing fly sparging, which I'll get to here in a moment. And some of the fancier setups, you'll see they'll have pumps, recirculation pumps, where they can just kind of recirculate it in for a few seconds and they're good to go. Okay, get rid of this. Alright, so what we're going to do next is we're going to start to, I'm going to set up this sparge just to show you how it's done. I like to batch sparge. I'm going to tell you the differences. So first off, you don't have to sparge. You can take all this as long as you had your full volume of liquid plus an extra gallon or two. You can just pour it directly in. I'm going to go ahead and start putting the wort into the kettle. Or you can do what's called fly sparging. This is the most complicated way to sparge, actually. I'll turn that off for a second to show you this. So this is one of the easier ways to do it. It's this little kind of nipple thing, reverse nipple, I guess you'd call it, I don't know. And I kind of like to stick my paddle there, get it going. And so what that's going to do is that's going to slowly over time, and then you want to make sure you have it set on the bottom here. The slower you do it, the better it's going to be. This is going to be a lot more efficient. You're going to need to use, when you do this, it's a lot more efficient, so you don't need to use as much water when brewing. You use probably almost a gallon less water. So it saves in water, but it does take the longest to do. It's way more time consuming and more complex, and it can require special equipment. Another way to sparge, so that's doing that. This is also fly sparging. I'm just showing you another tool that I kind of rigged together really fast one day when I needed to do a fly sparge. I recommend fly sparges on beers that you really want to, especially like high ABV beers or beers where you really want a lot of complex flavor. If you're going to be doing like any kind of like decoction mash or anything like that, fly sparging is always going to be the best. But again, you don't have to. So this little tool, can you see that, Matt, under the camera?
Yeah, sure.
So I just threw this together with some PVC pipe. I drilled some holes into it. And then this is too big for this mash tun, but on a larger mash tun, it just sits over and sprinkles, although I have that all upside down. It sprinkles it all on top, just like this does. Just another way to do it. There are all kinds of DIY plans for doing copper ones. I've seen people make rectangular ones for the rectangular coolers, which are really nice. But again, if you don't do this and you want to not do a sparge at all, or you want to do a batch sparge, which I'll show you next, you'll have to use more grain to get efficiency. So you will have to buy a little bit more grain, which brings me to Beersmith. This is a program that I like to use a lot. This will tell you, depending on your pot size, your kettle size, and everything, you put all your numbers in, it'll tell you how much grain you're going to need and how much you're going to have to supplement that, whether if you're going to be doing a batch sparge or a fly sparge or no sparge. So while doing a no sparge and a batch sparge is easier, and it's not cheaper because it's not as efficient. I'm going to turn that up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and turn this down. We'll keep that on. I'll turn this off for a second because I'm going to show you batch sparging. So I'm going to go ahead and take my whole cooler down here to the floor. And batch sparging is basically just, once the grain's been rinsed, just adding extra amount of water in steps. So you're going to pour all your sparge water over the grain bed in 2 or 3 additions, maybe more. If you're using like a pitcher like I am, it might be more, depending on the capacity of your equipment. Then draining all the wort. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a full about 6 gallons, depending on the batch that you're doing. I'm doing a 5-gallon batch, so your final kettle volume should be about 5.5 to 6 gallons because of that the boil, the evaporation loss. So you're going to have something to compensate for that. So extra bit of wort in there. And we're not quite there yet, so I'm going to go ahead and batch sparge this. Now this is easier than fly sparging, but more efficient than not sparging at all. So this is what most home brewers like to do, is batch sparge their beers. And it is much faster than fly sparging. And most breweries, inside their big mash tuns, they have these big arms that turn. I've seen people make turning ones with little motors on them that spray the water in a circular motion. And that's really great, because the problem with fly sparging is, you may have noticed, depending on where the water hits, it'll kind of make holes, and you want to kind of make it an even sparge. So having it spread out so it's kind of raining on the grain is always going to be the best way to do it. And we are not even close to getting there, so I'll have to grab some more water. So just pour the rest of this in. And try to do this slowly. It's best to do it with a smaller vessel than a whole mash tun, but there we go. All right, as long as the bottom half of this is nice and settled from that recirculation, the Vorlauf that we did, then there shouldn't be any particles coming through the tube. Yeah, looks pretty clear. So we're going to let that reach its 6-gallon volume. And of course, all this stuff is probably going to be a little shorter of a show, because there's not really a lot to sparging. Although I think I might go through whirlpooling with you too. Well, no, whirlpooling will happen at the end of the boil. We won't be doing any pre-boil whirlpooling. And one thing about this, whenever you're doing this kind of stuff, you want to try not to splash as much as possible. You can get what's called hot side oxidation, where it'll oxidize your beer a little too much. And I'm going to 6 gallons, about a 5.5% beer. I've already done the work on the Beersmith to figure out how much water I'm going to need, and I think it was like 5.94 or something, so just about 6 gallon mark should do it. And that's close enough. And here, in this kettle, is 100% pure sweet wort. Oh yeah. Now, this is exactly what you're getting in our cans, except it doesn't have the hops in it, and it's concentrated, of course. So they remove a lot of the water to make it into a syrup. So unhopped malt extract is basically this, with a lot of the water removed and turned into a syrup. So if you've seen from the MASH episode, and if you missed that episode, we do have it in our videos. If you click on the top of this page after this stream, you can look at the Friday before last, the All Grain video that we did. That explained how to do a mash. So that's all done. And the spent grains here, by the way, if you have chickens, they love them. It's like a treat. You want to feed it as a treat, obviously not as a meal, because I used to raise chickens, so I know a little bit about it. And also dog treats. Get like a dog biscuit molds, or any kind of mold really. Mix them, I think it's like a cup of flour, a quarter cup of the spent grain, peanut butter, and bananas blended all together. Bake that in an oven for like 450 degrees, and then for like 20 minutes, and then I think 250 degrees for like a few hours. Makes it really hard, and the dogs love that. Did I do the mash out last week? No, I didn't do a mash out last week. I had a really large volume of water in that. That big gray mash tun lets me do a lot more water. When I don't have that one available, and I use my orange one, I usually will have to mash out with this if I'm doing a bigger, higher alcohol beer, because it doesn't hold a lot of water. So I'll drain a good portion until I could fit that 200-degree mash out water to reach my final temperature, and it'll stop most of those enzymes. What is whirlpooling, since you said it? Now I'm wondering. I'll get into that more. It's going to be at the next one, because it's an end of boil thing, not an end of lautering technique. And it's basically just stirring it a lot for like 20 minutes. This is one way to add extra hop character into your beer. A lot of people who are doing the New England IPAs, they're adding their hops during whirlpool instead of during the boil to keep the IBUs down. But we will definitely get to that next Friday, because that show is going to be about doing the boil. I'm going to talk about what a hot break is, a cold break is, doing the boil, and whirlpooling and chilling, which is important. That's where your cold break comes in. All right, so I mean that's pretty much it with all of that stuff. So now I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. I'm probably going to boil it later. You can actually take your wort. You don't have to boil it right away. Some people have been known to. In fact, there have been breweries who will during the big brew every year, which is something I think we at Mr.Beer should host sometimes. Where they'll make a whole bunch of wort for a whole bunch of home brewers, and then the home brewers take it home and they boil it themselves, adding their own hops and things like that. Now, when you do have wort like this, you want to keep it in an airtight, sanitized, well, it doesn't even have to be sanitized since it's going to be boiled, but at least very clean container, refrigerated. That's important. Because of all the sugar and it hasn't gone through a boil yet, there could be wild yeasts and bacteria that's on there. Yeah, and also another method for mashing that I forgot to talk about last week is leaving your grains for like 2 days in 100-degree temperature. This can promote bacterial infection, which can be desired in certain beers like sours and things like that. All barley has a little bit of lactobacillus on it, so you can do a natural bacterial inoculation by souring your mash. And basically that's what Guinness does for a small portion of their mash, to give their beer their unique flavor. Does anybody have any questions about lautering or sparging or vorlaughing or mash out? And by the way, I'm drinking this is actually the beer I made 2 weeks ago. The mash that we did 2 weeks ago. It's a New England IPA. Came out really, really nice. I force carbonated it, so that's why it didn't take like 4 weeks. We also have Beersmith on our website if you want to buy it. It's really awesome. Brad Smith is a really great guy. I've been in contact with him over the past few years about getting some of our extracts on there. One thing though that they've had problems with is because our extracts already have the hops in them, he doesn't really currently have a way to figure the IBUs into your recipe on there quite yet. Q-Brew, which is a free program you can find on Screwy Brewer's website. He's one of our forum members as well, and he created a software called Q-Brew a while back. And Eric Green, who used to work here and now is the head brewer at Dragoon Brewing Company here in Tucson, he helped build a database for that. So Q-Brew does have a small database of our Mr. Beer kits. So if you wanted to go on there and figure out recipes and adding grains and things like that, that's a really good resource. If you want to learn a lot more about that, you can let me know or go on our forums. If you go to the underneath the screen, we here on the Twitch we have our community forum. Our community forum sign up. Go there, check, register, and check it out. We have all kinds of information on there about Q Brew and Beersmith because a lot of our forum members do use them. And thank you, Matt. He just posted up the link for the Beersmith. But we're still working on that. We can hopefully get our hopped malt extracts in there. So again, you've seen how difficult it can be to make all grain beer. There are ways you can make it simpler, such as the brew in a bag. Now with the brew in a bag method, that typically is a no sparge method, just because of the nature of it, because it's the bags in your kettle, so you just need to use extra grains and extra water. Although I have seen some people actually make like hangers or like a ladder with the bag where they can lift it up on pulleys, and then they would sparge it with hot water over the big bag, but that can cause a mess. There are a couple products on the market that will allow you to do that. One guy does have a system with a pulley system that's available on the market. But for the most part, brew in a bag is the simplest way to do all grain because it doesn't have a sparge. You don't really need all this extra equipment or mash tun. It's basically you just need a pot and the special bag, and that's it. And maybe a pot should have a nice nozzle on it for putting it in your fermenter. But this is a little bit more complicated way. This is kind of middle ground way to do it. The most complicated way are the guys with the rims and Herm systems, which I'll explain those in a future episode as well. And those are usually like side by side with fancy pumps and that recirculate and do everything, and it's pretty much turnkey. I think doing it this way, this feels a little bit more like home brewing to me, especially when you're building tools that help you in your home brewery, and then you make an amazing beer from those tools that you made. It makes it that much more satisfying, I think. So yeah, just being creative, which again you can do that with our Mr.Beer kits too. We take all of this work out, so you can do most of the creative parts, such as flavoring with hops, adding fruits, doing special yeast, barrel aging, all kinds of different things. You can make some really, really amazing beer with just Mr.Beer kits. And while I do all grain brew a lot because I do it for competition and for testing recipes and grains that I like, I also do the Mr.Beer kits when I don't have a lot of time or money or space, and I just want to make some beer for some friends at a party or something like that, or a family get together. And they love that beer just as much as the all grain beer that I make. So definitely, if this intimidates you, don't be too discouraged that you don't have creative control, because you absolutely do have creative control with Mr.Beer products, or with extract brewing, or with any way of brewing. It's just about how much creativity you want to put into it. You do get a little more creative control with this because you can pick your own grains and everything like that. And if you do want to get into it, again, brew in the bag is the best way to start, but you can get as complicated as you want. I always say brewing is not rocket science, but it can be if you make it so. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and cut it a little short today, because this wasn't a really big step, but again, we can't fit like a 5-hour brew day in one stream, though we might try to do something like that in the future. Who knows? Raul Duke says, what is the origin of the terms sparging and lauter? I couldn't really tell you that, honestly. I know lautering is definitely a German word, because most of the terms wort and vorlauf and all these things come from Germany, because they were the ones that kind of invented a lot of these brewing techniques because of their limitation with the German purity laws. So I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be surprised if sparging is German too. I'll have to look into that, and yeah, I'll look into that and see if I can find something out for next Friday's show. Yeah, so what are we doing Tuesday, Matt? Do you know?
I don't know off my head.
Tuesday, Tim's most likely going to be doing another beginner stream for you guys. Wednesday, I think I'm going to be picking up on the The intermediate stream, I'm going to pick up on the unhopped malt extract batch that I missed 2 weeks ago. And we'll get that done. That's basically making a batch of beer with just malt extract and hops instead of hopped malt extract. So I'm going to show you how to add the hops in and everything. It's going to be very similar to the boil for the next show, but you're going to see how it's different because with the malt extract batch I'm going to be doing, it's going to be a partial boil. We're only going to be doing like a 2-gallon boil, whereas with an all grain batch we're going to be doing a 5-gallon boil, which will require a wort chiller. And there's a trick for doing a 2-gallon boil, and I'll show you that next Thursday. I'm not giving anything away yet. Tim Tuesdays. That's a good one. Brewing with fruit. Yeah, we'll definitely get into more of that. I don't know if we haven't done any fruit beers yet, have we, Matt, on here? Yeah, I don't think we've done any fruit beers yet. That's a good idea. We might do one of those next. Maybe do one of our Mr.Beer with fruits on Tuesday, or who knows? I might even throw some fruit in that batch on Wednesday. I mean, you can brew any beer, you can throw some fruit in. So, I will say though, when brewing with fruit, a lot of people like to add their fruit at the very beginning during fermentation. Don't treat it as a fermentable, because that's when all your fermentables go in for your primary fermentation. Treat it more like a spice or an additive, because you need to add it later. If you add it in secondary rather than primary, or for Mr.Beer kits, if you add it 1 or 2 weeks before bottling, you'll have passed that main fermentation period, which will give you more fruit flavor, because that main fermentation period is really vigorous, and it will strip all the flavors away by eating all of those available sugars in the fruit really fast. But once they've calmed down after high Krausen, which is after 3 to 5 days, then you'll still retain a lot of those sugars and colors and things like that. And yeah, keep it sanitary. And that's another thing, is if you're using fresh fruit off your tree, you might want to pasteurize it, or consider using sulfites, like potassium metabisulfate. You can get them in most homebrew stores. It's called they're also known as Campton tablets. You crush them up and add it to your fruit, depending on the amount of fruit. They usually say on the manufacturer's instructions. You add it to the fruit and let it sit for like 24 hours, and this helps break down or helps prevent, it kills wild yeast and bacteria. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the yeast that makes beer, is pretty tolerant of that chemical, but a lot of other yeasts and mold and bacteria are not. So that's something to consider. It's what a lot of winemakers do for their wine. But if you don't want to add any kind of chemicals like that, then totally fine, just pasteurize it. Just keep in mind that pasteurizing above 170 degrees can kill some of the flavor. Typically using canned or frozen that's already been processed is pretty good. Nick Ball just ordered Velvet Velociraptor and Boysenberry Tart. Nice, yes. Yeah, I don't know how old those recipes are. I think the Boysenberry Tart might have the correct instructions, but some of those still say to add the fruit at the beginning, and I really stress to add them at the end, 1 week before bottling, 1 to 2 weeks before bottling, and give them a good purification in a sanitized blender. What is the pasteurizing process? It's basically just kind of heating or steaming or boiling fruit or vegetables. Well, you're not really boiling it. You're bringing it up to anywhere from 130 to 170 degrees for an hour or more, depending on, gosh, I think it depends on your altitude, all kinds of different things. But it's pretty easy to pasteurize fruit. It's just not good to use fruit directly off your tree without pasteurizing or sulfiting it, because you have a really, really high risk of wild bacteria and yeast and such. So you either need to pasteurize it or sulfite that fresh fruit. So yeah, canned fruit's the way to go. And we'll talk more about that in a future episode, Nick Ball, and we'll talk more about adding spices and cocoa nibs and all kinds of stuff. Anybody have any more questions? Oh, that's a good beer. I wish you guys could taste it. All right, we're gonna go close it up. I'm gonna go ahead and dump out all this grain. Probably save some for my roommate's dogs, and get that wort taken care of. And we'll take it up next Friday and start doing our boil and our chilling. That'll be a much longer episode because I want to fit all of that stuff into one. I thought about fitting this all in with the boil, but I don't want to leave you guys here like 3 hours. I think 2 hours would be a little better if we do go up to 2 hours. So I figured we keep this one a little short. We will see you, Tim will see you Tuesday, and I will be in the chat on Tuesday helping out if you guys have any questions during his show. It's always good to chime in. And thank you, Sugar Fungus, and it was great to see you guys, and we will see you on Tuesday. Cheers.